Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. We've got a great webinar here today. Friend and colleague Hank Buccella, that I met a number of years ago when he was at the Cleveland Clinic, reached out and mentioned that he's got some interesting work that he's been doing, and it's in collaboration with another company, and you're going to meet the people on this webinar that he's partnered with. So it's going to be a great presentation. We had a brief intro a couple weeks ago. He shared with me what he was working on. It looked really interesting. And so I wanted to get this out and be able to share it with other people. The phone, or I'm going to go to this next slide here. So the phones are on mute, and if you're on your phone and you want to mute yourself now, that would be great. I said the phones are on mute. That's not true, because I tried to mute all the phones as I normally do, and we weren't able to do that to get all of the presenters' audio. So if there's background noise that wherever you're at, if you can mute your phones, that would be great. We will have a point in time for people to ask questions, and we'll be able to get those answered. You can also use the chat function on the computer program, the GoToMeeting program, to get those Q&A out there. This is being recorded so that you and others that would benefit from sharing this with others, learning from what they've been doing, will be able to do it through the link that's going to be available. So now I'm going to turn this over to Hank and his team, who's going to go through the brunt of the presentation. And so, Hank, please take it away with your colleagues, Shon and Miki.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing with Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. I'll just do a quick setup. So, working with specifically the ED group at Rush, we actually were able to develop, deploy, test, refine an Andon system similar to what you would see in a Toyota production facility. And so really what our goal was to create a system that gives frontline caregivers real-time visibility to performance to plan, so patient progress to plan or to tack time. And so what we're going to share today is kind of that journey and some of the results, and some of the things that we needed to put in place in order to make this successful. So again, I'm Hank Buccella, as Mike mentioned, consultant for Simpler IBM. With me today is Miki Ferenczy, who's president for the tech company that we partnered with in Chicago, as well as one of his vice presidents, Shon, as we develop this Andon system. And I think one of the important things, or one of the critical success ingredients for us as we developed this system, was to have a tech partner that was responsive, agile, could do a lot of quick iteration, and could take some of the lean concepts around real-time flow, visibility, and quickly turn those into something that the user community could use, and the user community being the frontline providers, nurses, techs, and so forth. And so I'll let Miki and Shon just introduce themselves very quickly.
Sure. This is Miki Ferenczy. I'll just give you a very, very brief background of how we got here. So we've been working in the health IT space for 16, 17 years now, and we started off in disease surveillance, which obviously, given the current circumstances, is a rather interesting area where we're doing real-time artificial intelligence-based disease surveillance. So we're ripping apart the entire patient chart, labs, radiology, everything in real time as we got the data, and doing a probabilistic analysis of a variety of disease profiles versus the patient's symptomology. and doing a match, looking at home and work addresses, looking for clusters, things of that nature. And probably about 18 months ago or so, pivoted more on the operations side, working with Hank and his team and developing these tools more in the lean management, continuous improvement, value stream transformation arena. And once again, using the lessons we learned about medical information and the sort of the big data concept and applying rules to those data sets, parsing out meaningful information, we're able to pretty quickly stand up these new tools. So that's kind of the background of how we're coming at this.
And this is Shon Doseck. The only thing I would add on to what Miki said is that in the over 15 years that we've spent working with medical data, applying our experiences in the lean transformation, value stream transformation space has been extremely gratifying as a product manager. Watching people use your product and take action and see results on that, it's really gratifying, and we've had great successes in that as we've applied our tools and technologies in the lean transformation space.
Great, thanks guys. So I'll jump in, get to the meat of the presentation. So, one of the things is we worked with Rush leadership, especially the ED. What we recognized was that typically in healthcare, you've got a problem that crops up or starts, and then potentially you have weeks or months that go by, and the problem is still occurring, unfortunately. So sometimes there's some adequate containment of the problem, but not necessarily getting to root cause and solving that problem and making it go away permanently. And so, as we look at what we currently do in healthcare, a lot of the focus is this retrospective work. And so as this problem's been occurring, we may be organizing a workshop or an A3 team or a project, or maybe this makes the cut regarding strategic initiatives. But again, that can be weeks or months. And so that's, not, I suppose, not okay in terms of, what the impacts are to outcomes or patient satisfaction, staff satisfaction as this problem continues to occur until we can organize some work to actually address the problem. And so what we've learned, or what we kind of talked through with the Rush team, was, about 95% of the work in healthcare right now really focuses on this retrospective work, and it's great work, and we don't want to minimize that. But it's really only about half of what really the Toyota production system consists of in terms of their system to achieve operational excellence. And like I talked about, a lot of times between when the problem starts and when we actually address it, again, a lot of adverse effects occur. And so what we looked at, and as we talked and studied Toyota a little bit more deeply, was we really wanted to create this real-time visibility to progress to plan, and then start to build and embed these behaviors and these processes around immediate containment, not necessarily solving the problem, but fixing the problem, restoring flow, and then minimizing the impact to the day or the performance for that day or the patient or the outcomes. And so, again, we went back to Toyota. We looked at them as the benchmark. Again, a lot of what we do in healthcare is based on Toyota in terms of operational excellence. A typical Toyota plant assembles about 400 vehicles per shift. We looked at, the volumes that they put through their plants. We looked at the processes that the vehicles travel through, and it's about 250 unique processes from start to finish, whereas a healthcare encounter may involve about 6 to 8 processes. So just by sheer volume, I think, in terms of complexity, I think Toyota's significantly more. And then Toyota's able to achieve this end-of-line quality or ability to ship the vehicle at about 96 to 99%. And in terms of timeliness or schedule, they can typically hit their schedule, those 400 vehicles, within plus or minus 6 minutes of that particular schedule, typically 8 hours. So in terms of quality, timeliness, complexity, how are they able to do this? And so we went back to that and we studied it pretty deeply. And then we asked ourselves, well, why can't we replicate these results in healthcare consistently? Now, there's certainly pockets of really good performance in terms of real-time flow management in healthcare, but not to the scale that we need in order to really transform healthcare in the United States. And so what that led us to was this realization, or this recognition, that we needed to do something different. And so what we did was we looked at what we typically do at simpler IBM, or really a lot of consulting companies. We'll come in, we'll do a 2P, so we'll look at the physical space, we'll see how it's configured for flow, is it right size to meet demand? We'll look at staffing, right? So this concept of staffing to demand is extremely critical to make sure that we're tightly aligned between patient arrival or patient needs compared to our staffing. We'll create standard work. We'll try to create processes that are highly error-proofed. So that's kind of like table stakes in a lot of cases in terms of what we do when we engage a client or a healthcare system. What makes this different is that we actually, again, went back to the Toyota approach, and we've said, look, we want to build an Andon system for the ED at Rush that really gives that immediate real-time information to the frontline caregivers, that lets them know how they're performing to pace or tact when they have a flow disruption or an abnormality, that literally within 2 to 5 seconds they can see there's a problem. And then what we work with them on is this rapid response for those delays. And so how within 4 to 15 minutes we respond to that red Andon, that abnormality, and we fix it and we restore flow so that it doesn't impact or have this very adverse ripple effect throughout the rest of the day. And so later in this presentation, we're going to demonstrate live tools from the Rush ED that show how they use these tools to actually manage their minute-by-minute activity to maintain patient flow. And so one of the, you see this quote at the bottom of this slide. I think what we consistently heard as we moved through this process was from providers and nurses and techs and others that, we managed our Andon system to try to stay green as much as we could, so that we knew we had a good day leaving at the end of shift, so that we didn't have to look at the report retrospectively the next day to see where we had some issues. So that was pretty cool, and we started to see that type of that feedback coming through. So real quickly, so the Rush ED, the yellow boxes represent the flow cells that I alluded to earlier. They have about 8 flow cells. We took them through 2P, and what you would typically see in an ED, or really any area of the health system, is we had rapid assessment, low resource, rapid treatment unit. A lot of the high turn, low acuity, low length of stay patients, we wanted them toward the front of the ED so they come in, be treated, and released very quickly. And then, high resource, medium resource, obs holds were toward the back of the ED. So that was part of our work with them. And so, one of my I suppose core beliefs is that you should lead with results. And so on September 9th, we implemented the new Andon system. So we were in our second version of Andon at Rush when we deployed on 9/9, based on some feedback from the team. We had redone staff to demand. We made some tweaks to the configuration of the ED. But as you can see, on September 9th, when we switched on the new Andon system and the new processes that supported that, we saw really quick, significant reductions in length of stay. And we were actually astounded by this. So ESI levels 1 through 5. So what this represents is number of minutes that the patient spends in the flow cell by ESI level. And so, you can see, for instance, ESI 3, 225 to 195 for every single patient going through that cell. That equated to about 2,675 minutes per day, which if you equate that to FTEs, that's about a 5 FTE reduction almost immediately. And so what that told us was that giving the frontline teams this visibility to how they're doing to tact and to pace, and giving them the support resources to react to when they're behind and help them recover could provide significant benefit. And so, obviously, deploying an Andon system most likely won't be effective unless you have the processes and behaviors behind that, or to support that. And so what we really looked at in terms of enabling behaviors for Andon was this obviously this concept of urgency, and that every minute is important. And so that as soon as the Andon shows us that we have an opportunity to move a patient, we have to have the resources and the urgency to make that move. The other thing that we saw emerge that was really encouraging was that as we created these flow cells and we gave them visibility via the Andon to how they're performing to tact time, they really took ownership of making sure that they kept up with patient demand. And so this was kind of their pace setting mechanism. And that ownership really started to emerge, which was great to see. And then finally, this concept of teamwork. So we had at Rush, I would characterize it as some not so healthy interactions between providers and nurses in terms of teamwork. Because a nurse would say, hey, look, we've got patients in the waiting room. We've got capacity. Can we please pull some patients forward? But what the Andon system gave us was a really a more objective look at that. So it provided some, I suppose, more data or more objectivity to, when a nurse approaches a provider and says, look, we've got capacity, we've got patients waiting, it's very clear on the Andon system that that's the case. And so there's no subjectivity. And so that really started to break down I suppose, some of the not so healthy interactions between providers and nurses. And so, a couple of things we want to cover that are really important to consider before you implement a real-time flow management system or an Andon system is some foundational work. And really that is comprised of, standard work. So what we wanted to understand was, for each flow cell by role, how many minutes do they need to spend with each patient to produce the outcomes that we want? So giving them time to do their best work, to follow best practices, and again, produce those outcomes that we want. So, really in any case or any situation, standard work is very important. The other thing we wanted to make sure was in place before we implemented Andon was this concept of staff to demand. And so, we wanted to make sure that based on historic patient arrival volumes and the time it takes to care for each patient acuity level, that we had enough provider support, nurse support, PCT support or tech support to make sure that we can process that volume. And so when we calculated or we timed each role regarding how much time they need to spend with each patient times the volume, we could see that we had significant deficits regarding labor to meet demand for certain periods of the day. And so I think this is like a super important concept in healthcare, and I think it's something that's underemphasized, this concept of staffing to demand, because I think there's opportunity not only financially to better align the labor needed to meet demand, but also I think there's huge staff engagement, reduction in staff burnout, sustainability of workload benefits as you go through the staff to demand exercise. And so as we reran our staff to demand, you can see that, you know, we had this before condition where we had these periods where we were at a pretty significant deficit, and this is providers in this case, to meet the demand. And as we I suppose redistributed providers to be to make their schedules more closely match patient arrival patterns and demand, we can see that those deficits went down significantly. And so that was a big piece of this, is in terms of setting the ED up to be successful regarding flow. And so I think, again, this is kind of those underpinnings of what you need to do before you can implement Andon. And so I think there's some good tools out there. You know, there's this patient forecaster tool, for instance, or Bernoulli has a good product, but I think that this staffing to demand concept in healthcare is generally underemphasized or underutilized in terms of the benefits it can provide. So, so we did the prerequisite work. We did the staff to demand. We did the 2P. We did the standard work development. And then one of the really critical concepts that we wanted to impart on the Rush ED folks was this notion of containment versus countermeasure. And so when the Andon system shows you that there's a problem that you need to act, there needs to be very quick response, and you need to contain or fix that problem, not necessarily solve it. And then you need to come behind later when it makes sense, and then look at, okay, so why is this particular problem occurring fairly frequently? Let's do some root cause analysis. Let's come to a permanent countermeasure. Let's test solutions, and let's solve this problem so that it doesn't keep coming up. So the difference between fixing a problem and solving a problem was really key for the Rush team. And you know, over time, I think they began to kind of internalize and apply and grasp that. So to boil it down, really what it comes down to is that when a patient is ready to move, we need to be able to see that in real time. And if typically, for instance, in this example, a patient's been dispoed to move to OB status in ED, or really any part of the health system, if a patient is ready to move and there's an 8-minute delay between when it's been triggered for them to move to when they actually move, if you can cut that in half, it equates to enormous savings. And I think, like I showed earlier in the results from Rush, I think we're seeing that bear out a little bit. And so really that's what we're driving towards. It's really just shrinking that time and giving those frontline caregivers the visibility to when a patient should move, and then shrinking the time to when they actually move. Is really the essence of what the Andon system should deliver. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Shon, just to talk a little bit about specifically what we designed for Rush and how they're using the system.
Thank you, Hank. Yeah, so but before we jump in and take a look at the Andon board and the Flow Conductor tool live, we'll give you a little bit of a tutorial here on the organization of the data and what these different tools are intended to communicate and the actions that they're intended to drive. So the orientation of the Andon system that we developed is really 4 distinct areas or dots. The upper left shows the minutes since the last patient was pulled into the flow cell. In this case, it's 6 minutes since the low resource flow cell pulled a patient into their area to work them up. The goal for that is 13 minutes in this case, and that's based on current staff levels as it's scheduled and as staff are there. And part of that, or all of that really, is built from standard work, from the staff to demand exercise, and which drives then the staffing decisions. So all of that foundational work goes into to defining that 13-minute pace. And again, it's all about pace here in the real-time flow optimization. You want to keep up with that pace. And that pace in pulling in, but also the pace in getting patients out. So the 17 that you see on the right is the number of minutes since the last patient was moved out of the flow cell. Again, with the same goal of 13 minutes. If you're moving patients out at a pace of every 13 minutes, and to be clear, just to clarify, that's not 13 minutes that the patient spends in the flow cell, but rather between patients being moved out, there should be a consistent and smooth pace of 13 minutes in this flow cell, given the number of staff and the type of patients that they see. The lower left shows the number of patients that are currently waiting with a disposition to go through the flow cell, the low resource flow cell. And below that are the number of patients that have arrived in the last hour of that number. And this represents the demand for the flow cell. So if our pace, if we're designed to operate every 13 minutes pulling a patient in, that means that you could have 4 patients come in an hour and still be able to keep up. But as soon as you have 5 patients, you're gonna start to fall behind. So that's when that signal turns red, indicating that there's a problem that needs to be contained and dealt with. And then on the lower right, you see the number of rooms that are currently staffed and how many patients are occupied. And you can see that turns negative in this case. Could be the use of a hallway bed, or in a lot of cases could be bunking that occurs in that room. At the top of those 4 signals, we've added some more explicit or specific recommended actions that the operators in the flow cell, the nurses, the techs, the providers can use to make decisions about which patients are perhaps nearing their length of stay targets, which patients are likely candidates for considering for another unit, a CDU, a clinical anesthesia unit, or OBS and holds, if there's availability for that. So this all operates with no manual input. The data that drives this system is all the registration information and details that are entered at triage and throughout the patient encounter. In the case of Rush, it's all through Epic messages that we tie into in real time, and so that allows us to update and refresh the signals themselves every 30 seconds. Could be even faster than that, but yeah, that's the design and a quick tutorial on the Andon board. When we put it all together and look at it across the ED, you can see on the next slide. You can see all of the signals together in the same view. Now that is useful for flow, charge nurses, and ED staff that they're in charge of managing the overall unit. And so having a whole picture of the floor from the perspective of flow, of pull, and out gives us gives leaders an opportunity to in Gemba connect with those flow cells that need help, and those rapid response teams can help contain the problems and restore flow as it happens. Another view, if we pull to the next slide, another view of the entire system is the flow conductor, which is an active map of the department showing patients that are in staffed rooms and giving an indication of where those patients are in their length of stay, if they're approaching their length of stay target or over, in the case of the red patient that you see sort of just right at the center. It shows the waiting room and how as pace of arrivals outweighs the pace of pulling patients into the department. It can show that the waiting room is starting to stack up. Again, this is an extremely valuable tool for flow and charge nurses in managing the overall department, and gives the clinical teams in the individual flow cells valuable information on what their colleagues are dealing with. A lot of times, the clinicians will tell you that they are focused on what's in front of them, and when they feel like they're slammed, it can be kind of isolating. But when they see that the whole department is working together, it gives them the ability to maybe shift into that extra gear when they need to. We also provide a mobile application that distills the actionable information from the Andon board and the flow conductor down to very specific, evaluate specific patients, look at a patient in a specific room, those sort of guided actions. Again, the idea there is to direct response teams, to direct leadership, to take this information that has potential value, take action on it so that they can realize the value of this real-time flow information. And then, in the spirit of that, and to dig even deeper into the patient encounter, we've developed an E-Pitchboard that looks at orders for medication, labs, and imagery studies. And when we connect that with the service agreements with those support units, if an imagery study is taking longer than what the service agreement specifies, we can connect up and provide real-time alert notification to make sure that any delays can be minimized, and that those things that are needed to make the next decision to either progress the patient's care, move the patient out, whatever the case, that all those increment pieces are monitored. And so again, keeping track of all of those potential bottlenecks and highlighting where there's action to be taken to restore and maintain flow and pace. I think at that, I will hand it back over to Hank, and we can take a look at what's going on right now.
So I'm going to switch over to show Hank's screen. Might take a little while while we make this transition.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. hopefully everyone can see what's actually happening in the Rush ED
We're
right now.
we're
So,
still waiting to get the view. I'll let you know when it shows up. As I said, there's a little bit of delay
okay.
in the process. Um, when we did the rehearsal, of course, it went pretty quick. This is real life, so we have to. This is not the fault of their program. This is just the function of how the webinar system works. So we don't want people to feel this is going to reflect anything on what these guys, the great work that they've been doing. As this transitions, some things that I'm noting and probably going to highlight for other people to know about is the importance of the pre-work that you did to get ready for designing the software that would do this, and also teaching people the difference between real-time fixing the situation and then follow up on a more detailed cause and effect problem solution process. What sort of activity did you need to do to work with teaching people or educating people about concepts?
Yeah, I think one of our, one of the challenges was, or one of the I suppose our anticipated challenges was providers and really nurses seeing this as kind of an overseer, I guess if you want to characterize it like that. Like we're doing our best, but we just can't keep up. And so that's where I think the staff to demand, the standard work, understanding how much time they needed by patient acuity type to do their best work and to keep pace was really, really important. So it wasn't the organization telling the doctors and nurses how fast they need to go. It was just the opposite. It was the doctors and nurses saying, we need, for instance, 31 minutes of patient interaction between a provider and a medium acuity patient. And so we use that, like we did time observation to validate that. But once they told us how much time they needed to provide the best care and the best outcomes, we built that into the system. And now the system just tells us every 30 seconds how we're doing against that pace. And really, it was interesting because the providers at Rush, the docs, in some cases really, really appreciated this because they saw it as an opportunity to raise everyone's performance to some baseline where we had underperformers that weren't being addressed, to bring them up to a baseline or a minimum acceptable level of performance. And so that was really, really cool to see. And it really was kind of counterintuitive in terms of what we thought we would see.
Okay, that's helpful. Looks like we're still waiting for this. If it doesn't work, and then we'll move on, and we'll have something that we can insert later. We'll do a show and share and insert it into the recording. So
Okay.
I was prepared for this. If this wasn't going to work, I can move on and make myself the presenter again, and then we can go through the brunt of the slides, and we can always stop back to see if we've got some time to do this again. So
Okay.
you should be able to forward the slides. If not, then I can do it.
Sure. Yeah, and so I suppose to summarize, this concept of giving those frontline caregivers visibility to how we're progressing to tack time or to plan in real time is critically important. But in order to, I suppose, deploy that effectively, like we talked about, you really need to go through the prerequisite steps. And so those are really visioning, value stream analysis. Where do we want to start this? Like, what's our scope? What's our scale? Make sure the success ingredients are in place, that there's a compelling case for change, that leadership really wants this, that leadership's ready to play their role. Then we take the organization through the 2P process, where we stage for flow. We understand what is the size of the area need to be in order to effectively process the demand and maintain flow. Then we do our staffing to demand, like we talked about. There's some great tools out there to do that, but that's critically important to make sure that, again, from reducing staff idle time, staff overburden, staff burnout, that we really understand the work that's needed to achieve the outcomes that we want, and then we staff accordingly. And then once those 4 activities are complete, then we can come in with the tools, the Andon tools that say, hey, look, here's how you're doing to pace. Here's the arrival pattern, like Shon had described. Here's how, every minute, how many minutes between pulls into the cell, discharges, here's the capacity of the cell. And then when we're red, it's really working with the organization to define what's the threshold, the number of minutes that a cell is read before we send in some support resources to help them recover. So, again, maybe they're waiting on images, they're waiting on consults. How do we escalate that? How do we get that resolved or fixed so that they can resume flow? And so that's really the flow, kind of the basic, really high-level blueprint that we've done with Rush. And again, that we, would like to continue to do moving forward. So I think this is our last slide.
Yeah, Hank. And so really, we're talking today, we've spent the last, 18 months or so coming up with the processes, developing the tools around those processes, implementing tools, validating the tools, tweaking the tools, and actually then, once they're implemented, being able to show noticeable improvement in the metrics. So, we view this as a pretty significant success story. And what we're looking to do at this point is to really find some new partners where we can come in, work with your team, improve processes, improve efficiencies, implement the tools, and show some hard ROI based on that. And so we're really looking for some people to come in and work with us. So have their clinicians and operations teams work with us to configure our tools around your business processes and be able to implement them and get you some significant return on investment. So that's sort of where we're at now, is we're looking for partners where we can come in and get some results.
Okay, that's great.
Hank, I don't know if you have, yeah.
Was there more, Hank, you wanted to get to?
No, I think that covers it.
I wanted to give us another chance to try to see it live, so I'm going to go back and make you the presenter again and see if we can get that to happen. And then, if it's going to take a while, it took a little while last time. Oh, there we go. It went faster than.
Oh, we're up. Yeah, we're up.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really what we had hoped to show, and so. What you're looking at right now is the live real-time view of what's happening in the Rush ED in Chicago. And so, February 28th, 1:43 p.m. I'll just go through a few examples. So right now in their high resource cell, their pull or their TACT goal is to pull a patient every 23 minutes to keep up with historical demand. They pulled their last patient 2 minutes ago, so that's really good. As Shon explained, what we can see is that, we want to pull a patient every 23 minutes to keep up with demand, but it's just as important to discharge or admit a patient or move them out of the cell every 23 minutes. And so this is ticking up. And so this would be somewhere where you would have a resource or a rapid response resource to go to that cell and ask, hey, what's preventing us from getting patients out of this cell, and how can we help? And really, it's in the spirit of how can you help that cell? Again, with the assumption that everyone's trying to do their best to do the best job to keep pace. So in their flex cell, for instance, they pulled a patient 49 minutes ago against a goal of 19 minutes. However, you can see that they're full. So they've got 11 rooms occupied against a capacity of 10. So they probably have someone in a hallway bed. And so, you know, at this point, the question you might ask is, can we move some of these patients to holds obs where we can see that we have capacity? And can we free up some capacity in this flow cell to bring some of these folks that are waiting into the flow cell to be treated? And so really, again, this is, it's just this holistic view in real time that really helps you manage flow and see where you need to intervene and where these cells need help. And so, you know, again, I think this is kind of that breakthrough or that kind of innovation that I think healthcare sorely needs. Back to that Toyota analogy of, you know, as minute by minute, as we understand where flow has stopped, we can see it, we can react to it, and we can have appropriate responses to restore flow. So that's that example of real time. And then Shon described this real-time flow conductor tool where you can hover over any room. So this room is a high resource patient. You can see who's in the room, why they're there, how long they've been there. And so again, it's just that overall view of what's happening in your operation. And then from there, you can build thresholds for when you need to respond and help and what that help looks like. So I think that's all we really wanted.
I'm glad that worked out for us, that we didn't have to schedule another time to insert there. So I think that's great. There is a question from Terry, who's on the call. She says, what is the organization's appetite for lean and flow Kaizen before this project? Or another way to ask it is the maturity level of lean and Kaizen in, I guess it would be at Rush?
No, that's a good question. I think the ED group at Rush had been working on, had embraced this continuous improvement mindset for many years. They were really enamored by technology. They weren't necessarily great at process discipline. And so I think us coming in and showing them the underpinnings of the processes that need to be put in place, like standard work, staff to demand, 2P, and then you bring in the technology. I think it was a really good marriage of that. So they had, so their appetite was strong. They were just missing some of the kind of the prerequisites of discipline and sticking to it and PDSAing what you already put in place.
That's great. Appreciate that. I'll pause to see if there's other questions either by chat function or if anyone wants to speak up. We've got the phones unmuted. As I was watching this, both the time, Hank, that you showed me previously and then seeing it this time as well, what I was thinking about is it seems like this approach allows people to be good at what they do, whether they're nurses, providers, or whoever. And what they were looking for was a way to match this with the kind of knowledge that needed to be for good flow. And there's a couple ways to do that, of course. Teach people to be flow managers, but that requires somebody to be able to walk around and give orders and say, do this, and it takes a long time to develop that ability. And then, of course, what happens when the flow cell coordinator leaves? And this seems to be a nice marriage between how do we help people to know what's going on and what to do next. So that's one thing I took away. There's a great there's another question here is, what did you use to teach TAC time for when you were teaching people in the emergency room?
No, yeah, another good question. Really critical concept. I think, you know, ED folks are just kind of wired to just deal with whatever comes to them. And so to give them the, to use the historical demand, to teach them about the cycle time or the time needed to treat each patient based on acuity level, and have them develop that for us, I think really drove the buy-in. And then, based on how long it takes to treat and the number of patients coming in per hour, then we could say, here's your tack time that you need to meet. And we're going to staff to that. And they really appreciated that. And so taking them through the step-by-step, tack time, you can't necessarily influence, but we can staff to it. And so I think they really appreciated that staff to demand exercise to meet tack.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
I would add to that as well, Hank, that the alternative to maintaining pace and even flow is something that they continue to struggle with in bolusing of patients, and that has a lot of negative consequences as well, from the terms of quality and staff satisfaction. So the part of the lessons, I think, they were ripe for hearing it and understanding it, because they were always fighting that bolusing of patients.
Mm-hmm. Can see that. As we wind this down and I move on to the other slides, and you were talking about your interest to partner with other people that may be interested. I know, Hank, you and I talked about this could have application in areas outside of the emergency room. There could be other processes where people need to have visibility and the ability to act quicker than they are now. Is that true? It doesn't necessarily have to be an emergency room that you might want to connect with?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, this applies anywhere where, patients, supplies, materials, information moves through a process, and it needs to move at a certain pace to meet, customer expectations or to achieve the outcomes we want. So this would apply in a specialty clinic, an ambulatory clinic, an inpatient unit. Again, really, if you boil it down, it's really just understanding your demand pattern or your demand, what you need to keep up with, and then making sure that you're staffed to meet that, and then overlaying visibility to how well you're keeping up, if you really boil it down, Mike. So yeah, this is absolutely not just an ED offering. It's again, it applies everywhere in healthcare.
Yeah, I think that's great. Fozzie's got a question here. What level of service did you plan your staffing? For instance, maximum demand level or 90%?
No, another good question. Yeah, we didn't want to. I think we used like one standard deviation in terms of what we should account for in terms of kind of that up and down flexibility or what we could expect. Like, we didn't want to use average. So we used a little bit, I suppose, not worst case, but reasonable flex up and down and what we need to be ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And just to confirm, we did use one standard deviation over, which brings us to around 85% coverage.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. You've got some other slides here on feedback from staff. Do you still have control of did you want to talk about this, Hank?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think we can include this for anyone who's interested, but I think, it was really important, on September 9th, when we implemented the new Andon system and corresponding, like the supporting processes, it was really important to make sure that we, went through these PDSA cycles and got feedback from staff. So I think, generally speaking, we were pleasantly surprised with how well the ED team accepted the Andon system and actually started to use it to manage their day. But yeah, this is just some examples of some of the feedback that we got during that post September 9th launch. That's
great. I'm glad we included this in the presentation, and people can go review this and see it. So what happens next? This recording is going to be available for others if you go to our website. and you'll find the location there. The previous events get moved to a previous event location. I'm going to send the link out to everyone that participated and those that were on our distribution list, so people will have access to the recording that they can review and then share with others. That's our whole purpose. There's actually another webinar next week, could be related to what they talked about today. A friend and colleague, Dr. Paul Deschamps, is going to be talking about preventing provider burnout, but I think it could pertain to burnout of other types of professionals as well. So that's going to be on March the 6th at noon Central Time. And the link there, the bit.ly link, will take you to where the detailed information is. In March, I'm doing a follow-up webinar on a number of topics that I talked about in 2019, and better understanding complexity and managing complexity, pulling in some concepts from the Cynefin sense-making framework that I've been introducing to people, and we introduced in a couple of webinars in 2019. So that's going to be on March the 20th. And then in April, Jason Schulist is going to talk about generativity using adaptive problem solvers for thorny community problems, taking it at a community level to take a look at that. And then here are some topics that are in the works that, as we have people that have presentations they would like to share or questions they have about different topics, they can work with me on that. Something new that is just coming up, a business partner with us, my business colleague, Max Brown, has put together a podcast called the Purpose and Principles Podcast. And if you like podcasts and benefit from using those, the first one is available. An interview with Gerald Johnson, the Executive Vice President at General Motors, is the host, the one who Max talks to for that webinar. And if you go to that bit.ly link, you can go directly to that episode. And of course, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you normally get your podcasts, whatever platform that is. So the final note, again, if anybody has ideas for things they'd like to present, either a personal story or something that you've seen and heard, it'll be interesting to come back and chat with the gentleman that presented today to learn what has become with their work and what other partners they've worked with. And I appreciate them taking the time to put together this presentation to share it. And I'll be sharing their contact information if they're okay with that, so that if anybody does want to reach out, they already included that email on their slides, so that's what we'll be including for anyone that wants to learn a little bit more and perhaps partner with these guys. So with that, I'm going to close this down. I hope everyone has a good day, a good weekend, and be safe out there. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for hosting this great event.
Yeah, you guys take care. Thanks,
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.